Lekut Sichis Chelek Yud, Sicha of Breishis Aleph. Today we are beginning a new Chelek, as we are about to begin a new cycle of Chumash and Rashi from Parshas Breishis. We're beginning a new Chelek, Chelek Yud, and Lekut Sichis, which truly Chelek Yud is the beginning of these 5 krachim, these 5 volumes that we have been learning over the last few months. And today's Sicha is on the first Rashi of Breishis, the first Rashi of the Torah. And the Rebbe indicates that this Rashi is almost like an introduction to Rashi's biur, to Rashi's explanation throughout the entire Chumash. And by understanding this Rashi properly, we'll get a glimpse into how Rashi learns and how we are meant to learn a Rashi on Chumash. Dubur kama pa'amim. It's been spoken many times that even though Rashi's primary role in his Pirush on Torah is to explain the simple, basic understanding of the pasuk, as emphasized by Rashi himself in numerous occasions. Nevertheless, in addition to the Pshutei Shel Mikra, Rashi contains, and it is alluded to in the words of Rashi, also wondrous things, Mufloim, of other parts of Torah, K'mavur B'Shalom, Gam Rozen Deiraisa, even secrets of the Torah are included in the words of Rashi. As we know the Piskam, the saying of the Alter Rebbe, that Rashi and Chumash is Yena Shel Torah, the wine of Torah. And very, very often the Rebbe uses this expression, Yena Shel Torah, in his Pirushim, that in addition to Pshutei Shel Mikra, and in addition to understanding the main thrust of the Rashi on the pasuk, there's always something that could be squeezed out, so to speak. There's always a yishmak, an enjoyable and deeper understanding or lesson or approach of Chassidus that could be taken from Rashi, referred to as Yena Shel Torah. We'll move on. And it's also understood, since this is relevant in general to Rashi's Pirush on Torah. This is certainly true with regards to the first Rashi on Torah. Like we find on numerous occasions that the beginning of something contains and emphasizes their main content. So therefore also it's understood that the first Rashi is inclusive not just of the Pirush on that pasuk, but is inclusive in a more general approach to how Rashi teaches and what Rashi's message is. Move on, and therefore it's also understood that the Yena Shel Torah, the wine of Torah, the deeper level of the Pirush of Rashi, and the lesson that's taken from this Rashi that exists in this first passage of Rashi, since it is the first one of the entire Torah Shebiksav, is not just on this one detail. The lesson that we're going to take and the Yena Shel Torah that we're going to learn is going to be a general message for the Torah mitzvahs in general. So this is very interesting. Generally, Rashi, you learn a Rashi on a pasuk. You ask, what's Rashi trying to tell us? We understand Rashi. There's a Hira sometimes, a Yena Shel Torah sometimes, that is relevant to this inyan that's being discussed. Today we're saying like this, that since we're going to deal with the first Rashi in Torah. Number one, it contains a general message. And number one, it contains a message in how to learn, in how Rashi teaches in general. And number two, the Yena Shel Torah and the Hira that we're going to learn is something that's relevant to Torah mitzvahs in general, not just to this pasuk of Breishis Bara. Rashi Maschil Perushi ala Torah. So let's learn the Rashi. Rashi begins his pirush as follows. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Leya yatzarech la'askal es ha'teira ala me'achedes es elachem, she'i mitzvah rishena she'nistavu ba'Yisrael. The Torah should have begun with Achedes Zolachem, which is in Parashas Boy, which is the first mitzvah that the Yidden are being commanded, the mitzvah of Kiddush Achedes. Umatan Pasach Breishis. So in that case, why does the Torah begin with Breishis? Mishum Koyach Maisav Higid La'amoi Loseis Lamnach Las Goyim. And over here Rashi quotes a pasuk that says the strength or the power of his actions he related to his nation, to his people, to give them the inheritance of the nations. And Rashi explains, if the nations of the world are going to tell to the Yidden, you are robbers because you conquered the land belonging to 7 nations, the Yidden could respond to them, the whole world belongs to the Eibishter, who bara, as we see in Breishis bara in this pasuk, that the Eibishter created the world. And then when he wanted to, he gave it to whoever he wants, to whom it seems proper in his eyes. When he wanted to, he gave it to them, to the 7 nations. And when he wanted, he took it from them and gave it to us, to the Yidden. So Breishis bara Lakim tells us that the Eibishter is the balabas on the world. And therefore, Eretz Yisrael belongs to us because at this point, the Eibishter, who was the creator of the world and the owner of the world, gave us Eretz Yisrael. And now the lesson in the Yein Shel Torah is understood very simple. A person should not be affected by anything that opposes or anything that disturbs him from fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. When the nations of the world come with a claim to the Yidden that they don't have to fulfill the commands of the Torah, because according to them, according to the commandments of the Torah are irrational or illogical, or not moral. Just like they claimed with regards to the conquering of Eretz Yisrael that it was wrong, even though it came directly as a command from the Eibishter. So when the Goyim come and say that Torah mitzvahs doesn't make sense, so you shouldn't be doing it, a Yid should not be affected by this. On the contrary, you should strengthen himself in fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. And to respond to these people who are making this claim, to respond, so that this mitzvah that you're saying is irrational or immoral is actually the will of the Eibishter. And only through the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs are we fulfilling the will of Hashem. And therefore it doesn't matter the fact that a human mind doesn't comprehend it, because it's coming from the Eibishter. This is what the Eibishter wants, and this is how we fulfill the Eibishter's ratzon. So that's the general Yein Shel Torah, the general lesson. Number 1, straight straight as we begin, as we start off, the Rashi is telling us, don't be affected. The Yisrael have a claim. They're going to say what they want. Shouldn't affect you. This is only a very general lesson from the general message of Rashi. But we must understand that even in the details of Rashi, especially in the very first passage, in the very first pirush of Rashi, there's lessons not just in the general message, but also in the details that Rashi brings. And in this case, since this is the first Rashi, and almost like an introduction to the rest of Chumash, therefore, from the details of this Rashi, we're going to learn lessons that are generally relevant to Torah mitzvahs. So, let's do it. Practically, we say the Pirush Rashi is a fundamental and primary detail in this Rashi. Who Akosha Shmevia is the pasuk which Rashi brings. Kayach Maisav Yigid Lamay Los Eslem Nachlas Goyim. That the Eibishter related the strength or the power of his actions to his people to give them the inheritance of the lands. Why is this pasuk fundamental? This is the foundation of the to negate the argument of the nations, that the Eibishter is telling us his actions to be able to give the Goyim, to be able to give to the Yidden the Nachla that was initially belonged to the nations. So it's clear that this prat, this pasuk, since it's such a fundamental part of Rashi, is clearly coming with a very primary, important lesson in serving Hashem. So we're going to have 3 quick questions on this pasuk. Aleph Ma'ayira. Number 1, what is that lesson? What is the lesson that we are learning from this pasuk? Koyach ma'asav higid lamay. Beis, ma'u adiyuk b'tevas koyach ma'asav gomer. The pasuk says the word koyach, and Rashi quotes it koyach, the strength or the power of his actions. He told over to the nations, to the Yidden. Harei hakavana b'zeh lahasbir sha'yediyah shezeu ma'asav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu hainu shehu bara es ha'olam mechayev shebiyadei b'reshusei yisbarech lases l'nachlas goyim. The pasuk is telling us that the world is ma'asav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The world is his actions, his deeds, his workings, his doing. And therefore, this tells us that it is in the Eibishter's power and in the Eibishter's permission to give this to give to the Yidden nachlas goyim. So what are we learning from the koyach ma'asav? Could have said ma'asav higid lamay. The Eibishter told his ma'asav that he created the world, and therefore he has the right to give the world, the Eretz Yisrael, to the Yidden. What's the diuk of the word koyach? And Gimel, finally, the 3rd question, the most common expression, the most common term used for said is the word Amar. As mentioned numerous times in our parsha. In this very passage itself, it says that the Yidden tell the Goyim, so what was the word? What did the word that Rashi uses? Aimrim lahem. So again, we're using the term aimer. Sometimes we'll use the word diber. He spoke. Siper. He told over. He related. The lay higid. Higid is a very unusual term. So clearly, the fact that it says koyach ma'asav higid lamay is a question. Is a question, why do we use the word higid in this pasuk? So, to understand this Rashi, to answer these questions, we're going to learn a parallel from Eretz Yisrael as a place to Eretz Yisrael in our Aveda Ruchnis, in our serving of Hashem on a daily basis. The Yuvam B'Haktim B'Yurin Eretz Yisrael B'Ruchnius will understand this by first prefacing the explanation of what is the idea of Eretz Yisrael on a spiritual level. The mile of Eretz Yisrael is that the eyes of Hashem are upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. That the Eibishter's divine providence is there in a revealed way, more than any other part of the world. Which means to imply, even in the physical land of Eretz Yisrael, and in the matters, in the things that are being taken care of in Eretz Yisrael, Begilu Yeser, the light of Hashem is felt in a more revealed, in a more real way. The Yed, more so, Mikibon Sheni Hashem Lekecha Ba, since the eyes of the Eibishter are upon it, Harei Le Yitachin Ba Mitzad Atzma. It is impossible that there should be, if not for the involvement of the human being. But in other words, if you only from the Eibishter himself, there's no ra, there's no bad in Eretz Yisrael. The Eibishter has pure eyes; he does not see any bad, which means that if the Eibishter's eyes in Eretz Yisrael, then from the Eibishter's eyes, from the Eibishter's perspective, there's no ra. So there's 2 points made. Number one, that in the Gashmius of Eretz Yisrael, you could feel Elokus more. And number two, from the Eibishter's perspective, there is no Ra in Eretz Yisrael. Mizeh, move on. From this, we can apply this to the person's Avodah. Shebechinas Eretz Yisrael Beruchnius, B'Avedas Adam L'Kaineh, at the level of Eretz Yisrael Beruchnius. In the person's service of Hashem. He made this is referring to a level of completion in the Aved of Torah mitzvahs. When a person is doing Torah mitzvahs on the most complete, perfect way. Which this brings down a revelation of Elokus and totally negates any evil. And this is hinted in the name Eretz Yisrael. The word Eretz of Eretz Yisrael refers to the Ratzon of the fact of wanting to do the Ratzon of Hashem. V'gam Yisrael made alinyan Teiro mitzvahs, and Yisrael also represents Teiro mitzvahs. Kidu Asher Yisrael Rasha Tevis Yesh Shishim Riboy Sis La Teira. Yisrael is the Rasha Tevis. There are 600,000 letters in the Teira. Shabov Al Yada Vayidei Tziru F'Yesis Elon Isbaro Kol HaMitzvahs, with which these letters, or the combination of these letters, they explain, and therefore they are inclusive of all the mitzvahs. So Eretz Yisrael Beruchnius means someone who has completed the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs in a perfect way. Eretz Dotz Salasas Ritzain Keina, and Yisrael Yesh Shishim Nibueses Latera. Omnam. So that's the Avodah of Eretz Yisrael. But we don't get there automatically. It is a process. Just like it was Begashmias. Omnam, Kameshu, Pastor Sayanam, just like it was in reality. So he said, still shame. First, Eretz Yisrael was in the portion of Shem, the son of Noach. And then the Knainim conquered it from the Bnei Shem. Knaini was from the Bnei Cham. And the Knainim took it from the children of Shem. In order to give it back to the Yidden, which are also Bnei Shem, and to transform it into Eretz Yisrael, there had to be a conquering of Eretz Yisrael. It had to be conquered. There is not just idea of Eretz Yisrael, which is the completion of the Aveda. There's also a level in Aveda which is called conquering Eretz Yisrael. And that Aveda has to take place in the person also. In other words, there's one level where a person reaches Shleimus HaTorah v'Mitzvahs, but there's another level, which is the person goes through the experience of kibush, of conquering Eretz Yisrael. What is that? Vayinyinu. Neisif al klalos Aveda, the kiyum HaTorah mitzvahs atzman, which is Eretz Yisrael v'Ruchnius. In addition to fulfilling Torah mitzvahs, which, as we said a moment ago, that's the idea of Eretz Yisrael, to do the Eibishter's will and fulfill Torah mitzvahs. Every person is commanded that all of their actions should be for the sake of Hashem. And in all of your ways, you should know Hashem. To serve Hashem, not just through davening and learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. In all of his ways and in all of his actions that he's engaged in during 24 hours of the day. Even those that are being done for your bodily needs and for the material benefit. Even they have to be done for the sake of Hashem. And this Aveda has to be done on the highest level, so that he's able to transform all of his physical material matters, that they should be bottled and they should be one or unified with Hashem. That their entity, that their definition is transformed into holiness. And they lose sight, they lose feeling of the material aspect of it. Not because the Kedusha, the light of Kedusha overwhelms it to the point that it loses itself. It doesn't know what it is anymore. But no, because it is totally dedicated and connected to Hashem, to Elokus as the Eyu. That's not the way to do it. The idea of which in other occasions we explain the difference. But here we're not going to address it. But in general, the idea is to transform the Gashmius, that the Gashmius itself becomes a Davar Shebekdusha, something holy. And then he adds in the brackets a very Gishmaka addition. The Inyan HaKibush, so just a moment, let's summarize very quickly. So there's two levels here. There's the idea of Eretz Yisrael, which is Aveda Ruchnis as Ki Mateiv HaMitzvahs in the best possible way. Then there's Aveda of Kibush Eretz Yisrael, which is to transform the Gashmis of the world into Ruchnis, into Kedusha. And this Kibush includes one more detail. It's not enough that he is serving Hashem while being involved in material matters. But from time to time he should steal from the time that is dedicated to eating, drinking, or sleeping, and he takes them over, he conquers them. They should learn Torah and do mitzvahs in that time. So not only are we being kavish the world by taking a davar gashmi and turning it into a davar ruchni, but we go even more so, that we are taking, we're stealing a little time. So the time that usually is dedicated for lunch or for sleeping or anything like that, we say, v'tzuchap, in a few more minutes of learning Torah, because I'm being kavish my time. I'm conquering that my time should be used for limudat Torah. And that's what it means to conquer Eretz Yisrael in the person's avodah. He conquers earth, gashmistic things from the nations of the world, from the conduct, from the way, the modus operandi of the world, and he turns them into a land of Yisrael. That even the physical substance of the world, she'ein baza mitzvah, which is no mitzvah in it at all, it's world, it's gashmius, who gave he conquers it and transforms it to kedusha. And this will make more gishmak, more enjoyable to understand the saying of the Rabbi. When they responded to certain people who had asked them that they wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael, they said, Machda Eretz Yisrael, make here Eretz Yisrael. Their intention was not just that they should do Eretz Yisrael Baruchnius, which is a sea of a kiyum ateru mitzvahs. Kiyim gama aveda ruchnis to kibush Eretz Yisrael. Even aveda ruchnis of the conquering part of Eretz Yisrael. K'tiyah kaloshen machda, make here. I know asiyah da mitzvah shel da le'Eretz Yisrael kibush. A mitzvah shel da le'Eretz Yisrael. That there's not just that you're turning this place into Eretz Yisrael by doing Teiro mitzvahs here, but also you're doing here also the idea of kibush. Mach, you're also transforming the da into Eretz Yisrael. Kibush gama arsi shel chutz la'aretz gufa, by conquering the earthliness of chutz la'aretz. They say meres shagam isaskusi binyan yadishus utzerachav agashmim tiyeh be'efen. The last is Ritzein shel makim, that even his involvement in his non-obligatory, non-mitzvah matters, and even his involvement in his material needs, should be in a way to create Ritzein shel makim, to bring the Eibishter's ratzon down here. Gilui eirei Ritzein yizbarach ba'inyanim, to the revelation of the Eibishter's eir, the light, and the Eibishter's ratzon ba'inyanim shekol mitziyusam makim kipshuta inyanim agashmim. So the whole thing is really makim. They're made up of physicality to turn it into Ritzein shel makim, to bring down the Eibishter's eir and ratzon into the gashmis. So in Ois Gimel, we basically explain the idea of Eretz Yisrael and the idea of kibush Eretz Yisrael. That Eretz Yisrael means the aved of kiyum Torah mitzvahs bishleimus, properly. And the idea of kibush Eretz Yisrael is to not suffice by doing Torah mitzvahs, but to also take the gashmius of the world and transform it to kedusha. Utilize it for the Eibishter and for Hashem needs. Now we're going to see that it's not so simple. There is an argument to be made, albeit not a true argument or not a correct argument, but an argument could be made that this idea of kibush Eretz Yisrael or kibush ha'olam, to transform the Gashmi Yisrael into Kedusha, is not a proper avodah. And going to see this in the argument of the Meraglim, which is discussed in Parshas Shlach, and who argued that we shouldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. Eis Dalet. Ulo matzinu. We find that when the Yidden were traveling into Eretz Yisrael to go to conquer the land, there was the sin of the Meraglim. Their argument was it is impossible to conquer Eretz Yisrael. To use the Lashon HaPasuk, they said it's too strong. And the way the pasuk says it, it's too strong for him. Chazal explained that when they said him, they meant the Eibishter. The Meraglim said that even the owner can't remove his tools from there. Meaning to say, they argued that even Hashem himself cannot conquer Eretz Yisrael. It's not understood. How did this unbelievable transformation occur? In the spiritual state of the Meraglim. In the beginning, Rashi tells us they were kshedim. Moshe Rabbeinu chose them because they were upright, proper people, Meraglim. And now they don't believe the ability of Hashem. They didn't just say that the Meraglim or the soldiers, the Yidden down here, but they can't do it. They said, Afilu balabayis and the Eibishter himself can't do it. How do they come to such a conclusion when they started as kshedim? The gam. And another part that doesn't really make sense is they themselves, while they were saying that the Eibishter can't do it, referred to the Eibishter as the balabayis, as the boss, as the owner. So how are these people who acknowledge that the Eibishter is the balabayis, how could they believe that the Eibishter can't be kovish, the Eibishter cannot conquer Eretz Yisrael? So here's the explanation. How is it possible for the Meraglim to think that it would be impossible even for the Eibishter to conquer Eretz Yisrael? The theme, the point of their claim was, how is it possible to conquer Eretz Yisrael? How is it possible to serve Hashem by transforming Gashmius into Kedusha? So much so that the Gashmius loses their identity as a material object. It's the Eibishter who created the body, and the Eibishter created materialism. Who asked me to about Torah? Say, and the Eibishter himself commanded in the Torah, you should watch your health, which means that the Eibishter wants us to take care of our guf. And it's also a din in Rambam that the guf, for the guf to be healthy and complete, is part of the ways of serving Hashem. And it's also known the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov on the pasuk. You should help Chamer Senacha. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches that Chamer Senacha refers to your guf, and in the pasuk says Aziv Taziv you have to help the guf and not break the guf. It's also known what the Maggid Mezrich wrote. That when there's a small hole, a small defect, a small blemish in the guf that causes a great blemish, a large blemish, a large hole in the neshama. Meaning to say that the Maggid of Mezrich was reinforcing what we've been saying over here, that in order to be able to, for the neshama to do its job, the guf has to be healthy. Chazal teach us not to rely on miracles. The established nature and materialism to be something that is self-defined, not self-defined, but something that is defined, that is real. So here we have a bunch of examples of the importance of Gashmius. The Eibishter created it. The Eibishter wants us to take care of it. The Eibishter and Moshe teaches us not to destroy it. And the Maggid teaches us that how important the health is, which means that Gashmius is so important. The Eibishter created it and he wants it to exist. Comes out that the material things in this world are the Eibishter's tools. And are involved in the Gashmis is also part of the Eibishter's Ratzin. So how is it possible for the Nefesh Elikis, even though the Nefesh Elikis is a piece of Hashem, to conquer them? To remove their existence as a physical object, and they should become something that is only holy. This is the opposite of the nature that the Eibishter himself created. Since the Eibishter created the nature of the world in a way that nature has a tfisas makom, nature has an importance. Comes out that the Eibishter wants the Gashmius of the Gashmius. He wants the material part of the world to be seen as material. How could you transform it and bring Kedusha into it if it's not a Keli for Kedusha? The Eibishter created the materialism to be material, to be Gashmius. I knew. So now we're going to explain within the words of the Meraglim what does it mean that the Eibishter cannot be Moitzi Kelev Misham, he can't take his Kelim out. Because since the Eibishter is a Kel Yachel, he limited himself. Even though he's the Balabayis and the Balabayis usually can do anything. But he limited himself to not take his Kelim out. Like Chazal tell us that the Eibishter made a shvuah, and therefore the Eibishter can't go back on his own shvuah. Even though the Eibishter can do anything, but the Eibishter then puts himself in a position that he's not going to change anything. So therefore the argument over here is that if the whole idea of going into Eretz Yisrael is to transform the Gashmius into Ruchnius, come the Meraglim and say, Gashmius has to remain Gashmius. The Eibishter wants it to remain a guf. The Eibishter wants it to remain Gashmius, and that's part of the Eibishter's creation of the world. It's not our place to go. Even the Eibishter needs this Kalim. He means to say he needs the Gashmius to be there. He doesn't want to change it. The Meraglim argued, he didn't have to remain in the Midbar. And over there in the Midbar, the Yidden should serve Hashem by fulfilling Teiro mitzvahs. But the Meraglim taina did Aveda of conquering Eretz Yisrael, which means that to change the Gashmis into Ruchnius, that's not part of their Aveda. And you see this in their argument to remain in the Midbar. The Midbar is a place where people don't live. It's not a habitable place. It's you can't plant anything there. There's no water there. Who is manu matziv she'ena adam tzarich liyis al piteva asa b'inyan ha'gashmiyim. A midbar represents a person which is not involved in gashmius. Yeshuva shaleilam, which would be the habitation of the world. A midbar you can't habit, you can't live. So it refers. Sometimes we say midbar is the opposite. It's the lowest of the low. Here we're saying the Midbar is not a Makam Yishuv, therefore it means it's a place where a person is not involved in Gashmias. V'zui Tainus HaMeraglim, and this is what the Meraglim are saying, Avedas Hashem shayeches rak b'kiymat Torah mitzvahs. The Avedus Hashem is to serve Hashem by doing Torah mitzvahs. And where can you do this in the Midbar? When he is free from being involved in the needs of his bodily functions or his bodily needs. But if he's going into the land of the nations, which means when he has to be involved in material matters, he's eating, he's drinking, he's sleeping, he's taking care of his Gashmias, because these are Hashem's tools. You cannot conquer it under the control of Kedusha, and get rid of the Gashmias. This was the Tainus HaMeraglim. The Tainus HaMeraglim is that the Eibishter created Gashmias to remain Gashmias. And therefore, the Aveda of Yidus Teiro mitzvahs. But Teiro mitzvahs has to be done with Dvarim Shebei Kedusha. So you take tefillin, you take whatever it is, you take a mitzvah, you do a mitzvah. But to go and to b'chol derechecha da'eyu and b'chol masecha yi l'shem shemayim, that is contrary, according to their opinion, according to their taina, to the Eibishter's plan. That Gashmias should be Gashmias and the Guf should be the Guf. But in truth, it sounds like a good argument, but the truth is there was a mistake. The ultimate purpose and intent of the creation of all the Devarim Gashmiyim, and the purpose of why the Eibishter told us to be involved in the physical world, is for the purpose of drawing down Kedusha into the Devarim Gashmiyim. Because the Eibishter had a taiva to have a dwelling place b'tachtenim in the lowest of the worlds. And the whole reason why we're acknowledging, why we're giving any sense of importance to the Dvarim Gashmiyim, the only reason we have Gashmias is so that the Gashmias become a dira for the Eibishter. And if the Gashmias wasn't Gashmias, it wouldn't be a dira b'tachteinu, it would be a dira b'elyoinu. In order for there to be a dira b'tachteinu, there has to be a tachten. So the Eibishter created Dvarim Gashmiyim so that there should be a tachten, so that the Eibishter can have a dira b'tachteinu. U'kumayim Razal, Shekol inyani ha'olam nivru b'shvil ha'teirah shenikras Breishis, u'b'shvil Yisrael shenikru Breishis. As Chazal tell us that the whole world was created for the Torah, which is called Breishis, and for the Yidden that are called Breishis. Which means that the whole world was created for the Torah and for the Yidden. In other words, that the Yidden should use the Torah to transform the world. That even though on the surface they seem to be here so that they should be Gashmias, but the ultimate purpose of it is that they should be tools for Kedusha. Not only are they capable of transforming it, they are also obligated to conquer the land of the nations, meaning the Gashmias. Because only through this are we able to fulfill the ultimate Ratzon Shalmakim, the Eibishter's will, that the tachten, the lowest possible tachten, which is the Gashmias of this world, that it should be a Dira Leis Baruch Yesem, which is even more important to the Kavanah than working with Inyanei Kedusha. So, the Meraglim made a mistake. The Meraglim didn't realize that although the Eibishter created Gashmias, his purpose of the Gashmias and the reason he wants the Gashmias to be Teifes Makim as Gashmias is so that he should have a Dira Ibetachteinu. But the ultimate kavanah of the Gashmias is to be transformed to Kedusha, and it should lose its Gashmias when it becomes a Dira for the Eibishter. And that's why the Meraglim had their taina, but they were wrong. So now we're going to say that this taina of the Meraglim could lead to the taina of the Umas Ha'olam, or the taina of what we're representing as Umas Ha'olam. From the taina of the Meraglim, it trickles down in a chain reaction, so to speak. The taina of the Meraglim, it came from a good place. But once you open up that taina, it could lead to the taina of the Moshe. They said as follows: when a Yid is learning and davening and doing mitzvahs and not involved in the world, the nations can agree that a person at that time could feel the light of Hashem, the light of Kedusha. When a person is involved in the regular mundane matters of his day, the Umas Ha'olam come and say that that's not part of Avodas Hashem. And therefore, during this time, say the Umas Ha'olam, his conduct has to be consistent with the imagery, with the way the Gashmis wants him to look, the Gashmistic world. Therefore, they say you are robbers because you have stolen, you have conquered the land of the nations. So the Umas Ha'olam are saying, don't mix Gashmius and Ruchnius. When you're involved in your business, you go to work in the morning and you're doing your job, there's no reason to mix any Kedusha over here. And that's how the Eibishter, their argument, similar to the argument of the Meraglim, that's how the Eibishter created the world. The Gashmis is Gashmis. So don't mix in Kedusha into your regular day-to-day life. The argument will be even stronger, that the person's mundane needs or mundane matters have a first right over Torah mitzvahs. As we see in the order of things in Torah. First, the Torah starts with the creation of the world, and after more than a whole chumash, start the mitzvahs. So the Umas Ha'olam are saying, look, in the very Torah that you're learning, first comes the world, and then comes Torah mitzvahs. So therefore, so too in your own life, first you should focus on your mundane matters without getting involved in any Kedusha, without trying to change it or transform it or make it holy or whatever it is. And then, when you go to the base medrash or to shul, then you could learn, you could daven, you could do mitzvahs. And they're not arguing against Torah mitzvahs. They're just saying that there's no room for Torah mitzvahs in the rest of your day. But their whole taina is a taina sheker, is a false claim. It's a mistake and it's a falsehood. Because the ultimate purpose and the Eibishter's ratzon in all of the Gashmi is that you should make out of them a dira leizbarach b'tachtenim. You should make a dwelling place for Hashem out of it. So that's what Rashi is telling us in this very first Rashi. Comes Rashi and says, obviously there's the Pirush HaPoshet of Rashi, but in the Yeinish Shel Torah, Rashi is telling you like this: the B'shas a Yid is going to get involved in the worldly matters, and he's going to try to bring in the Eibishter and the Eira Kedusha, to try to draw down Elokus into the physical world. The Umas Ha'olam, whoever that represents, Welt is going to come and say, V'staganef, you're stealing the Gashmis from us. The Eibishter created Gashmis, obviously the Eibishter wants Gashmis. So why are you taking away the Gashmis of the world and making it Ruchnis? And the Yid is going to answer that the Eibishter Taka created Gashmias, but the whole reason why the Eibishter created Gashmias is to make into Dira B'Tachtenim, and therefore that's what I'm doing. I'm transforming the Gashmias of the world into being a Dira B'Tachtenim for the Eibishter. And now we'll see it in the words of Rashi. Now we'll understand the pasuk koyach ma'is of the word koyach. In order to remove the claim and the argument of the nations. It's not enough to know of the Eibishter's actions. The whole foundation of their argument is that the Eibishter created Gashmias. So to know that they argue that because the Gashmistic things are the Eibishter's doings, the Eibishter's workings, so if you try to use them for your own needs for Kedusha, then you're stealing from Gashmias. So the fact that the Eibishter, the world is the Eibishter's Maisim, that's not enough. The pasuk is telling us that the koyach, which means to say hakavona v'atachlis, the intent and purpose, shema pnimiyus v'akoyach shel ma'asav, which is the deeper part, the inner part, and the strength, the power of his actions. Higid lamed, that he gave over to his nation as well. Umedayek higid v'lei omar v'kayetzim, and he specifically uses the word higid because HaKadosh Baruch Hu higid v'himshich. The word higid means to draw down or to draw close. That the Eibishter koyach ma'asav, the Eibishter gave the koyach, the deeper intent of his actions. He drew it down into umasa'ir la'ama. He gave it over to his people as hapnimi is hakoyach shv'ma'asav. The Eibishter didn't just tell the people what he created. Because the Goyim will argue, he created Gashmias to be Gashmias. So the Eibishter was Koyach Ma'asav. He tells the Yidden what is the intent of his Maisim. And not just he told it to them, but he gid lahem. He drew it down, he brought them closer to it. Hainu, and told them what was the ultimate purpose and reason for these works, for these creations that he made. Shal Yidei Avedis Bnei Yisrael, Yehavchu HaMaisav the Kedusha. That to tell the Yidden that the ultimate purpose of why he created everything was that they should transform Ma'asav, the Eibishter's Ma'asim, into Kedusha, as explained at length in the Sikha. So we had three questions in the beginning. Question 2 was, why did it say Koyach Ma'asav? Because he means to say the Pnimiyus HaKavana of the Ma'asim was given over to the Yidden, which was not just the fact that the Eibishter created the world, but that the Eibishter wanted a Dira B'Tachtenim out of creation. And the third question was, why did they use the word Higid? Because Higid comes from the word Himshich. It's interesting, he brings in the order 41 that there's parts of the Gemara that are called Agadata, or Agoda, which are like the stories of the Gemara. So he says one of the reasons it's called Agoda is because it's Moishech Libe Shaladim, it draws the person in. It's a story, it's interesting, and it draws the person in. So you see a correlation between the word Agoda, Higid, and Meshicha, and something that's being drawn in or pulled towards you. And that's why it says the word Higid, because he didn't just tell it to them, but he drew it close to them. And obviously the first question was, Ma'i Ha'ira. The Ha'ira is very clearly that the Aveda of Yid is Dira B'Tachtenim. The Aveda of Yid is to be Kovish, the Gashmis of the world, and to transform it into Kedusha. And when the Goyim come and say, you're not supposed to do that, the Eibishter created Gashmias, and you're stealing the Gashmias, we could answer to them, Faket, no, this is the Pnimi Sakavana, this is what the Eibishter wants. One last thing we still have to explain, which we didn't actually mention this in the questions, but the Rashi is written in what some may consider a long-winded way. It could have said it started from Breishis, and in order to tell us Koyach Ma'asav Higid La'amah. Instead, it says so it's sort of a long-winded thing. So this is going to be explained in Isaiah. Based on this, we can also understand very well the lengthiness, the long-windedness of Rashi's question. That we didn't have to be, he shouldn't have started the Torah from here, but he should have started with Achedes Zolachem, Shei Mitzvah Rishena Shenitava Baba Yisrael, which is the first mitzvah which the Yidden recommended. Umatam Pasach with Breishis, and why did they start with Breishis? Hanidis Kekefa Lashon. It seems redundant. He should have just said simply, he started from Breishis, not from Achedes Zolachem, because Keach Maisav, etc. What is the idea? What is the message in the length, seemingly redundant wording of Rashi? Rashi wants to emphasize and elaborate. That the Eibishter created the world in its natural state, which seemingly nature belongs to Umasayla, to the nations. Nevertheless, the purpose of everything is Teiro Mitzvahs. Which is the mission, the role of the Yid. Mitzvah Rishayna Shenistava by Yisrael, which means to say, when he refers to Achedes Zolachem, he refers to it a mitzvah, which is the role of the Yid. Dafke be'efin she'yiyet tzerech. That although the Eibishter created the world in a natural state, which seems to be the ownership of the Umas Ha'olam, nevertheless, the Eibishter put in Teiro Mitzvahs, which is the role of the Yid, so that way we should do it in a way that we should conquer the world and nullify or negate the question of the Umas Ha'olam. They're saying you didn't need the Torah. We only need Achedes Zolachem. That's the time of the Messiah. We don't need the whole Gashmis of the world. We need Torah mitzvahs, but the whole Breishis and the beginning of Shmois, which is all about the stories of Torah, which is all about the Olam Hazeh. The Umas say we don't need it. That's what Rashi writes in this long-winded way, because Rashi is expressing the tightness of Umas Ha'olam, that we don't need Torah, the beginning of Torah. We only need Achedes Zolachem. We don't need the whole fact that the Eibishter created the world. And Rashi responds and nullifies, undoes the question, that the Torah, which is the power, strength, and the purpose of the Eibishter's creation, Maschila begins, V'ikir Tachlisa, and its ultimate purpose is Levatel Lahelem Shebemaisav Ala Koyach Shebehem, to undo, to nullify the concealment which the Maisim, the Eibishter's actual creations, the Gashmias of it, are covering up on their inner purpose. And that's why the Torah starts Davke with Breishis Bara. To relate to us and to draw down and to reveal the ultimate power and strength and purpose. That the reason the Eibishter created Gashmias is not so the Gashmias should remain Gashmias. The reason the Eibishter created Gashmias, the reason the whole Chumash Breishis exists, which is all about the Eibishter's creation of the world, and the etc., is all for the purpose of telling us that the reason the Eibishter created Gashmias is so that we should draw down on Lakus and Gashmias. I would have agreed with Moshe that we have to do Torah mitzvahs, but Elam Hazeh is Elam Hazeh, and therefore comes Rashi to tell us this message. And it's a message that's not just negayah to this Rashi; it's negayah to the whole Aveda of a Yid, day in and day out. That a Yid has to know that his Aveda is Kima Teru Mitzvahs. But a Yid has to know that in addition to that, his Aveda is Kibush Eretz Yisrael. To be Mahapech, to transform the Gashmis of the world into Kedusha and holiness. And if there's going to be a taina from Umas Ha'olam, that the Eibishter created Gashmias, and the Eibishter wants the world to remain as a Gashmi, the answer to that is that no. The ultimate purpose why the Eibishter created the worlds of Dira B'Tachteinim. And the Eibishter wants us to expose, to take out the Koyach Maisav, out of the Maisim, and then transform the Maisim, the Eibishter's creation of Gashmias, into a Dira B'Tachteinim, to draw down a Lukus into the Gashmias, and that is the Aveda of the person, and it is with this that Rashi begins his Pirush, And Rashi begins his Pirush on the whole Torah because this is a general message to the Yid in his Avodas Hashem.